On the podcast today, we're going to speak about the practice of fasting the mind, the philosophy of fasting the mind. And as most of you probably already know, that I have a book called Fasting the Mind. And the book is based on the fundamental practice of fasting the mind in the East, which we find in some of the greatest traditions in the East. We find it particularly in Taoism, Buddhism, Vedanta, and classical yoga, through differing practices and lifestyle philosophies. And it is obviously, fasting the mind is something that would be very beneficial for people in the modern world who are caught up in the rut and are caught up in this excessive busyness, which I do speak about in my book, Fasting the Mind. I do highlight the need for speed as suicide, and I have chapters with those sorts of titles. And so I was always fascinated by fasting the mind. And the way it was termed fasting the mind actually comes from Zhuangzi. So it comes from the Zhuangzi text. So when that practice is translated from Chinese into English, it's termed fasting the mind or mind fasting. And I have here actually the Burton Watson translation of the Zhuangzi, which I highly recommend. Burton Watson was a master translator, and he translated many great texts. Even he did translate Hanshan too, Cold Mountain. But I just want to read a little bit of where the fasting the mind terminology came from. And it came from, actually, there's in the text, there's a passage, as you know, where Confucius, usually Zhuangzi in the text, as you know, condemns Confucius for being a stiff. But in this particular passage, he uses Confucius as the sage figure, and he actually plays the mouthpiece of Zhuangzi. And Confucius is with his most famous disciple, Yan Wei. A lot of people probably know Yan Wei from history. He's one of Confucius's main disciples. And so he uses Yan Wei in this. And then what happens in the passage is Yan Wei has all of these plans to reform and transform this ruler in Wei, in a Western state. And this ruler is, he's treating the people terribly. He's not paying them enough. He's treating them like slaves, and he's basically just a grub, right? And so Yan Wei has all of these plans to go and, teach the ruler the Confucian way, right? Like teach him to be pious and noble and moral and so forth and so on. And as he's explaining this to Confucius just keeps knocking it down. No, that's not it. You can't just, you're still going there with the plan. And so I'll read towards the end of that passage to give people an idea about how this passage actually ended. So after Yan Wei has explained a lot, like he's talking about, how he's going to reform this ruler, Confucius ends up saying, "Goodness, how could that do? You have too many policies and plans, and you haven't seen what is needed. You will probably get off without incurring any blame, yes, but that will be as far as it goes. How do you think you can actually convert him? You are still making the mind your teacher." Yan Wei said, "I have nothing more to offer. May I ask the proper way?" "You must fast," said Confucius. "I will tell you what that means. Do you think it is easy to do anything while you have a mind? If you do, bright heaven will not sanction you." Yan Wei said, "My family is poor. I haven't drunk wine or eaten any strong foods for several months. So can I be considered as having fasted?" "That is the fasting one does before a sacrifice, not the fasting of the mind. May I ask what the fasting of the mind is?" Confucius said, "Make your will one. Don't listen with your ears, listen with your mind. No, don't listen with your mind, but listen with your spirit. Listening stops with the ears, the mind stops with recognition. But spirit is empty and awaits on all things. The way, the Tao, gathers in emptiness alone. Emptiness is the fasting of the mind." Yan Wei said, "Before I heard this, I was certain that I was Wei, but now that I have heard it, there is no more Wei. Can this be called emptiness?" Now, Wei here not meaning Wei, but as in Yan Wei. There is no more Yan Wei. That's all there is to it, said Confucius. Now I will tell you, you may go and play in his birdcage, but never be moved by fame. If he listens, then sing. If not, keep still. Have no gate, no opening, but make oneness your house and live with what cannot be avoided. Then you will be close to success. So you and I both know this chapter intimately, but that's kind of the crux of where the fasting the mind terminology comes from, right? In the East, it comes from the Zhuangzi text. And it's kind of interesting because Yang Wei thinks about fasting in the sense of how everyone thinks of fasting, right? In the modern day, fasting has become such a hip thing. Physical fasting has become such a hip thing to do. Oh, do you intermittent fast? Do you do a water fast? And there's nothing wrong with that. But that's not the fasting that we're talking about here. But at the same time, it almost operates the same. So you fast your body, right, to heal impurities within your body, to detox and so forth and so on. Likewise, you fast the mind to heal cognitive impairment, to work on, as I mentioned in the book, the Wheel of Samsara framework, so getting down into your samskaras and your vasanas to ultimately affect your karma. And so the method is the same as physical fasting, but you're dealing with the mind. But people just don't think of the mind in that way, right?
Yes, we take food and drinks and to keep our physical body healthy and strong, right? So that we easily get into physical fasting to keep the health. So, yes, we like to do physical fasting, but the mind fasting is such rare term, I think, for a lot of people. And we don't take mind as something that also consumes food, right? In the book Silence by Thich Nhat Hanh talks in depth about this, and also you actually used his quote in your book Fasting the Mind about that part, which he says a lot about how we consume everything mentally through our mind, right? Like, for example, we drink our chai in every podcast and we want to have lunch later and whatever. And all these things we consume to keep the physical body healthy, but also we take like whatever we watch, whatever we listen, and also environment that we are in. And also like even when we go out, whatever people talk about things, everything around us is kind of food because we consume them. We sometimes get disturbed by what other people say, and we get disturbed by what we hear, what we watch, movies, news, or whatever you get to come in contact with. That is all part of food, right? Because it affects us in a mental way or physical way, whichever way, and that all is part of food. Even car noise, all these things, that's food, right? We don't consider that. We never think of that way, right? But in a sense, that's all food for our whole entire being. So that fasting the mind is kind of very essential thing, as well as physical fasting. We should treat actually more so important than physical fasting, right?
Yeah.
Because as soon as you wake up in the morning, mind functions, right? Whatever happened last night, you might still ruminating in those thoughts, and you straight away thinking of what you should be doing today, and all these things come into your mind, and you're instantly in this whirlpool of thoughts, right? So we need to watch these things, what we consume internally and mentally. So that it's actually more important than what we consume as actual food, as an edible food, right?
Because it affects you a lot more, because your psychological state, I mean, obviously a physical state determines your state of perception as well, but like you said, what you're consuming mentally has a much more powerful effect, and this is why in the East they target that before any type of idea of physical fasting, like because the idea in the East is that as in the same way that we consume food through our mouth, we consume energy through our eyes and our ears. So, like you said, whatever you're listening to, whatever you're watching, is going to have an effect on your nervous system. It's going to ultimately affect your experience of life. And this is why, if we go back to the Warring States period of China, Lao Tzu and Zhuangzi particularly would criticize the glib of Confucian society, and when we think of glib, as opposed from ancient times to modern times, think of the glib as pop culture.
Like techno music.
But just pop music. Pop music and so mainstream news, everything that's pop.
Yeah, culture.
Pop culture is glib. And so what Zhuangzi and Lao Tzu would say, especially back in the Warring States period of China when they existed, was that if you're constantly consuming the glib, it's going to affect your experience of life. You're going to start to think like the glib. You're going to start to ruminate on glib thoughts. Your experience becomes glib. So,
it's all around us, isn't it? And even though you would say you don't like that pop culture, right? And because it's all around us, and subconsciously we absorb everything, right?
Yeah.
You try to consciously avoid it, but because you can't avoid it everywhere you go, right? So that it always around us, and you would consume subconsciously.
Yeah, well, your samskaras are always on. You're always picking up everything. You are taking in all of your experience. So your subconscious is always turned on. There's no doubt about that. So that's why it's important to cultivate a lifestyle where you've essentially renounced pop culture. You've renounced the glib, and you have essentially your life in your own hands, so to speak. So you are, like our podcast a few weeks ago about renunciation, like you are applying, these are key parts also of mind fasting, which we find in Vedanta and classical yoga, where you find vairagya, so non-reactiveness, and dispassion towards worldliness, and also viveka, so discernment between, your experience. So identifying what's, psychologically healthy for you and what's going to cultivate harmonious dispositions within the self. So if you're constantly going around consuming, if you constantly, like for example, what's a bad habit these days, which obviously keeps the mind agitated? People constantly have their headphones on, they're constantly listening to something through their phone or whatever other device they have. And so their mind is constantly activated. Now, this is an important point, because when we look at mind fasting and we look at the ancient nervous system of mind fasting, and it's not even ancient nervous system, it's actually been proven by modern science, where you have the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. So the sympathetic nervous system is activated when you're doing, when you're busy, when you're on. And the parasympathetic nervous system is activated when you are resting. And, so that's why that one's actually called rest and digest, and the other one's called fight or flight, So what we are developing in the world is we are developing a society, and we're developing people that are constantly turned on. So their sympathetic nervous system is turned on. Now, people will say, but what about when I go home and I rest at night and I chuck on a TV show and this and that? You're still on. Do you see? The nervous system is still turned on, and you're still doing, but the doing's happening in your mind. Your mind has not subsided. The vrittis in your mind, the whirlpool, has not become tranquil, which essentially makes it hard for people to sleep at night and so forth and so on, because their mind is agitated, and they might be firing off that last tweet in bed and stuff like this. And this is not psychologically healthy, and actually inhibits one's spiritual progress. And this is why fasting the mind is essentially important, because fasting the mind begins to activate the parasympathetic nervous system in waking hours as well. A lot of us only activate the parasympathetic nervous system when we sleep, but we're supposed to be activating it when, in waking hours.
We're awake as well.
Exactly. That's why meditation is important. That's why satipatthana, mindfulness, is important in everyday life. These practices keep the parasympathetic nervous system switched on, which allows your actions to be more appropriate and immediate. This is the path of Zen, right? It's a nervous system path. It's about when the sympathetic nervous system needs to be turned on, it's conservatively employed, but it's used efficiently. It's not overused, you know.
It's almost a bit like a yin and yang kind of thing.
It's exactly like yin and yang.
Because the sympathetic nervous system being yang and parasympathetic nervous system being yin.
Exactly.
So that when we are more yin, we're more calm, peaceful, tranquil. But from that place, you can only act appropriately.
Yeah, of course.
Right? You make a right decision, right action, right? And right the verbal action as well. But if you're always in yang, because then you're too active all the time, your mind is not clear, and you will make a wrong decisions and wrong action and whatnot.
Yeah.
So that these things are imbalanced right now for a lot of us, right? And to bring it back to balance is to make our lifestyle a little bit of adjustment, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you have to have a fasting the mind lifestyle. You have to be cultivating that, you know. And this is also like what you were saying about verbal, even the way you think. Like in Buddhism, right? You have right thought, right action, right livelihood. You have all of these things, and that's it. It's about that. It's about, because, like, it's good that you use yin and yang, because, you know, if you're all yang, what happens? You burn your system out. If you're all sympathetic nervous system, if you're just in action all the time, this is how people burn out, right? They're accustomed to doing. Now, when you look at the human organism, as we look at the earthly organism, they're both the same. It has its own daily season. So you have the yang period of the day, then you have your yin period. And likewise, we have to think about that psychologically, mentally, on a conscious level. We have to think that, yes, you know, we are going to use action today, but are you going to use it to the point where you burn yourself out? And so what happens over time, and what's happening with the general populace in the world, is people are constantly activating the sympathetic nervous system and they're burning themselves out. And this is leading to people in conflict, nations in conflict, religions in conflict. Everyone's tired.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, no sleep, increasing of depression, panic attacks,
Exactly.
Anxiety issues. That's kind of very common now, isn't it? Like, it hasn't been common like, let's say, 20 years ago.
No. Well, with the advent of the internet, especially, has really contributed to this constant yang on switch, you know. And I mentioned, actually, in Fasting the Mind and actually in Effortless Living as well, about the yin deficient world. We're essentially living in a yin deficient world. And to nourish yin, we have to fast the mind. This is what Zhuangzi's point was. This is why all of the other practices have accumulated, because, you know, if you don't have a meditative mind, you can't deal with things efficiently and you can't deal with things properly, you know. That's why we have burnt out politicians and that making the wrong decisions. This is why we make wrong decisions within our family, because we're worn out.
Yeah.
And we say things we don't mean. It's not really our character. You know, a lot of people will say, oh man, his character's way off. He's always saying this and that. It's like, if he gets enough rest, I bet you he's a completely different person. If he meditates, if he eats well, if he does the basics, the fundamentals right, I bet you the person that you see and have interactions with it would be completely different. But if you put him in an environment which is unnatural, where he's on 24 hours a day, don't expect him to be a good person or her to be a good person, because they're burnt out. How can they be? You're asking them. You're asking them an inhumane thing to achieve. Like, you can't achieve that. Like. And some people say, oh yeah, but some people, they can just absorb a lot of things. But everyone's different. And most of us aren't like that. You know, a lot of people will project their own psychology and that onto, like, say, successful people that they see in society who are very busy. And they say, I can be like them too. And it's like, but you're missing a whole lot of things. They got a lot of people doing things for them. They can achieve a lot more because they do. You're seeing a very small slither of their life. You know what I mean? Like, it's not that they're doing from 6 a.m. till midnight. I mean, it doesn't work like that.
Yeah, we're definitely deluded by these new social media culture that's only showing the bright side of these people,
Exactly.
right? And what they have achieved, right?
Yeah.
But it doesn't. They don't show what they had to do to get that point, right?
No.
They usually just promote the end results of their work, and we just make a quick judgment on that. Then we all strive to become that person or to achieve what they've achieved, right? But then lack of understanding of ourselves cause there are a lot of those problems, the psychological problems, and we don't know ourselves enough. Yeah.
No. Well, I've had emails and people saying that, giving me kudos for the amount of activity that I do and the amount of content I produce and this and that. And a lot of people think that I'm working from like 6 a.m. to midnight at night. And as you know, because you live with me, that's not the case. So maybe I'm more organized, but it's not the case. You and I, we have a lot of time outside of what I do and outside of what you do as a musician as well. And so it's about just allocating your time better and what helps us is you incorporate meditation, healthy diet, you have enough activity through the day. These things keep your life grounded and allow those other things in life to shine a lot more, And it's so simple, actually. And I know that each and everyone's situation is different. That's something we've got to be mindful about. Like, I know some people may work at a job they may work 12 hours a day, right? So it's going to be more difficult for those people working 12 hours a day. But in the short amount of time that they may have each day, they can still cultivate or activate the parasympathetic nervous system. And it's about a reorientation of what's important in your life too. I remember hearing this from a Buddhist monk many years ago. He was telling me that, to really advance on the path, you also have to be dedicated and serious about it. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, that is right. You should be eager to do the genuine, continuous practice.
Yes. It can't be like a fleeting fad. Like, I think the problem in the world these days is that there's so many fads. So meditation and mindfulness and things like that fall unfortunately into that category. Spirituality as well. Whereas if you're truly invested in this path, and I'm assuming most people who listen and watch this podcast are really invested, because you and I, this is our life work. So this is what, we're not mucking around here. We're serious about this, and we have been for a long time. And, there's no coincidence that we're attracting people who are sincere as well. And the ones who aren't sincere, who may be new age or whatever, they fall away. But you have to be very dedicated to it. And that's also goes into living the fasting the mind lifestyle, because a lot of people, this is the thing, like, and I speak about this actually in Fasting the Mind, where people are so dedicated to their career and making money and this and that, but you have to transfer that dedication and that effort over into the Fasting the Mind lifestyle, the spiritual path, about cultivating more yin. If you understand that we live in a yin deficient world, then you yourself have to cultivate yin. It only begins with each and every individual. It doesn't.
Exactly.
It doesn't. We're not going to get a politician up in front of the media today saying, "Look, guys, we live in a yin deficient world, all right? So mandatory meditation every morning for everyone." And this.
Yeah, well, if you're lucky enough to be in India and living in India, it might be a little bit different, but not for us, definitely.
No, not for people outside of India, and maybe like for example, when we're in Thailand, right? Like a lot of young Thai people, which is really good. They learn how to meditate from a young age, and meditation becomes part and parcel of their life experience, of their lifestyle. Now we need to take that outside of those places and put it around the world, but what's important is you have to understand it deeply, and you have to be really dedicated to it. You have to be dedicated to being a healthy and sane person, and that's what the fasting the mind lifestyle is primarily about. So fortunately, in saying that, a lot of people around the world are becoming interested in Eastern philosophy, spirituality, and the meditative practices, which, you know, well, you and I would have never came across it if it wasn't that way, right? So, and a lot of people are, and a lot of people are getting more interested, you know, maybe in this podcast and so forth and so on. So we're talking about these subjects and we're discussing it, and there is a movement of people becoming interested in it. And so that's why we're seeing a lot of the practices have been taken on board outside of those places we mentioned in South Asia and Southeast Asia. And so when we talk about the practices, we have to talk about, as I mentioned before, so we talk about Advaita Vedanta, right? So Advaita Vedanta, one of the main practices is self-inquiry, and self-inquiry is a fasting the mind method of constantly observing the persona, the I. So who is that wants to do this? You know, who is the one who wants to react? Who's the one that wants to be aggressive in the situation? You're cultivating more of an awareness about yourself. And as we know, like, harnessing that awareness is part of the core of all Eastern traditions, of coming back to that pure awareness. And so, you know, Advaita Vedanta is one of the older paths, right? Coming out of, especially, like, as you know from reading the book, coming out of the Indus Valley and the Vanaprastha tradition. And, you know, the Vanaprasthas being forest sages or forest philosophers or whatever you want to call it, kind of similar to our modern day sadhus or yogis. And so they would leave society after they fulfilled their duties, right? Like, and completely drop off the map. So fast the mind, and in fasting the mind, they merge with Brahman, you know. And so we have Advaita Vedanta down the line that came from that Indus Valley tradition, and same as within classical yoga, right? Classical yoga, and within both of those, especially those Hindu paths, you have the tools of fasting the mind. You have we mentioned earlier, vairagya, viveka. Vairagya being, again, dispassion and non-reactiveness, and viveka being discernment. And so out of those philosophies, you have what I term as the wheel of samsara framework. And so you have the samskaras, which is the mental impressions and subliminal imprints in the that are wound up in the subconscious. And then you have the vasanas, the latent tendencies and habitual ways. And then you have your karma, which is your action and your unconscious actions. And so these three make up the wheel of samsara. And why I say the wheel of samsara, because when those three elements are not cleansed out, or you haven't kind of revealed the darker elements or the unknown elements of, especially your vasanas and your samskaras, then that's what brings you back life after life. But in a microcosmic perspective, that's what keeps you acting a certain way in this life too. You see, not just coming back life after life, but you constantly producing the negative traits about yourself in your current life.
Like temperament that you're born with, things that you get attracted, and things also come to you without asking for, and these these kind of things.
And just the way that you react to things, you know what I mean? Like your reaction towards things and this and that, which obviously is a sign that you're acting from your vasanas, that you're acting from your habits and your tendencies towards whatever the situation is. And the only way to counter that is to fast the mind and to reverse the wheel of samsara to a certain degree. And I mentioned that, talk about that in fasting the mind, where, so for example, if your temperament, even your genetic temperament, is to react a certain way towards something, bringing awareness to that and stopping that. And so then you begin to, as you become more conscious of yourself, you apply more of the vairagya, the non-reactiveness, because you're applying more discernment, see? And so what that does is it affects the vasanas. So, but you got to do this this is not something that you could just do for one day and just go, I tried it, didn't work. It's like, it's like, first of all, you're talking about a lifetime of conditioning. You're talking about traits you picked up from your mother and father and your grandparents and so forth and so on down the line. You got a whole lineage of psychological energy flowing through you, social conditioning, everything, all of these things. So it's a life philosophy. That's why fasting the mind is a lifestyle approach. So you're constantly observing that, and it's going to affect your vasanas, which then ultimately transforms your samskaras. So then your experience of life becomes different. See, so your temperament or your habits or the way that you would react in a certain situation begins to change. Remember, we got a friend in Melbourne, and it was about 10 years ago. I was lecturing in Melbourne, and something went wrong with your flight, and then we had to cancel your flight. And my friend said to me, "Come on, Jace, get angry. Why aren't you?" And it's just like, there's just nothing I can do about it. Do you know what I mean? Like, this situation is out of my hands. We just got to book another flight. We just have to take the loss. We have to take the loss. And I mean, what's fighting it going to do? But because he had known me in high school, he's thinking that I should act a certain way because that's how I would have reacted in high school. Would have got the shits and
rage,
rage.
Rage.
Like any teenager would. Because the situation seemed a bit unjust, but it was just the way it was, right? So that's what begins to happen when you begin to work on it. You begin to change your attitude towards certain situations. Meditation obviously helps because meditation is a mind fasting practice, but these things happen over time. It's like it doesn't just happen overnight.
Yes, it has to be kind of part of your lifestyle, even the process of thinking. You need to actually put deliberate effort to be very mindful of your thought process, really.
Yep.
And I see it like Wheel of Samsara framework. It sounds very sophisticated, but so unknown science of psychology to me, because when we thoroughly go into that philosophy and we apply to ourselves, in time, we see the result. It works.
Yep. Yep.
Well, we live in such a compartmentalized society around the world. So just like, let's say, the Western medicine, I have some problem in the heart, for example, right? And they would just put on surgery in heart. Yeah. And you're all sweet to go. Everything is good. But then a few months down the line, you'll suffer from some side effects or, because Western medicine don't see it just organ by organ. They don't see things all connected in the holistic way of thinking, right? So that we don't get to apply these way of thinking. So that, but then just like how herbal medicine work, right? People, well, let's say, a lot of people don't believe in herbal medicine. They don't have to believe in anything like that. But in herbal, let's say a Chinese medicine or even Ayurveda, it's a long-term treatment. Yeah. So that we talked about this before, it's not to fix the problem right away, just like taking a pill, like a painkiller, and the pain goes away. But to give an entire treatment according to your lifestyle, so that eventually, gradually, your lifestyle get transformed to continue that lifestyle. So you're changing your lifestyle in the end becomes the treatment, right?
Yes.
So it's ongoing, continuous process so that you transform your lifestyle and keep it that way so that you live healthy life and without any health problem and whatnot. And I think fasting the mind process is exactly the same. We expect, let's say, 1 month of meditation. Yes, it's good length amount of practice to do, let's say, every day, half an hour or 1 hour every day for 30 days. That's good. But we shouldn't expect too much from that. No. We shouldn't expect everything is going to change. Like, oh, I'm going to become a more peaceful person, more calm person. I'm going to change my personality, temperament, and whatnot. We can't expect that within 30 days, right? While you accumulated all your conditioning for last 30 years, for example.
It's not going to offset
or
it.
more, yes. Yeah, we have to take this as in a lifetime commitment, and we need to stick to it.
Yeah.
And eventually that becomes our habit so that we no longer need to even effortfully think about doing this, right? It becomes part of your lifestyle so that at that stage that you no longer need to put a lot of effort or force to it because that already became part of your way of thinking, right? Always observing yourself and being mindful of your behavior or verbal use or everything like that. At first, of course, there is a friction because it's something new, right? We need to rewire our brain. But once we go through a good, lengthy amount of time of doing this practice, then it'll become part of you. And it'll become easier, right? Because it became your lifestyle.
Well, it's like anything. Like you practice violin, it becomes effortless over a while. You practice this lifestyle, it becomes effortless. Because, obviously there'll be effort at the beginning because you're trying to change certain patterns that you've become accustomed to. But then after a while, those new patterns become they're the ones that dictate your life then, So a lot of people, like, for example, get turned off with meditation because for the first week or month or so, it feels like laborsome for them. But then when you apply that to your life for 10 plus years and you're just doing it all the time, then it just becomes a part of your life. It's not really something that you do. It's part of your life, And so that's what it's got to go from. As you and I know, like we've seen at the end of say, for example, a Goenka Vipassana retreat of 10 days, we've seen people, instantly go crazy. Go crazy in the sense that they'll go to the pub or they'll go and just chit-chat with someone for like hours on end. And look, I can sympathize with that, but what have you learned from that 10 days of pure silence? You still didn't transform those vasanas. Those vasanas are still strong. Your habitual way of just looking for verbal stimuli and chit-chatting had not been transformed in a 10-day. And as you know, a 10-day Goenka Vipassana retreat is like psychological surgery, but it's not enough. It's not enough. Even doing 2 or 3 or 4 of them is not enough. You have to make the practice, you have to make the fasting the mind lifestyle your life. And so because I mentioned Vipassana being one of the fasting the mind practices, is that the traditional practice of Vipassana, which is practiced in the Goenka method, is one of the methods you should be practicing
at all times,
and make it your daily meditation practice. I do mention Zen open awareness meditation in Fasting the Mind, my book, but Vipassana, like if you look at Vipassana as a technology for the Wheel of Samsara framework, which we mentioned, what happens there is because you're practicing Vipassana, and when you're practicing Vipassana, the technique is anapanasati, so awareness of respiration or awareness of breath. Now, the idea of that is to constantly bring your awareness back to your breath, but you're trying not to alter the way you're breathing, which is very difficult. Because when you first start meditating, you instantly, as soon as... It's funny when you become aware of something, you start to alter its way of behaving instead of just letting it naturally just do its thing. And so when you're practicing Vipassana and you're applying Anapanasati, once you get to that stage where you're out of that habit of altering the breath and you can observe the breath, then you get down into the sensory level of your body. Now, this is where the interesting work, the deeper work begins, because according to Vipassana and according to Buddha, is that when you get down to this level, which I would call the sensorium, and in Pali is called Vedana, the sensory level, is when you put your awareness on the senses and those sensations within your body that we don't ordinarily pay attention to. But it's interesting when you're sitting down in a lotus posture or cross-legged and you're just focusing on what's happening in your mind and then in your body, it's amazing how much sensations you actually notice, right? And so, and because the mind and the body are not separate, they're connected, the idea here is that you are becoming aware of the sensations, and then in constantly bringing your awareness to that sensorium, this is what transforms your samskaras. Because the root of the samskaras is, and the unconscious and the subconscious is rooted in the nervous system. It's rooted in the experiences that you've accumulated through the nervous system. Also through the mouth too, but mainly through the eyes and the ears, right? It's accumulated through here, which affects your sympathetic nervous system, a lot. And so you're constantly observing these sensations, which over time, obviously, again, like what you mentioned, you can't just do this for 10 days and think that you're going to get night and day results. It has to become your practice, and you'll see then that your samskaras and your ways of behaving begin to change. Now, a lot of people will argue, oh yeah, that's just because you're meditating and you focus in your mind and this and that. Well, that's not according to the Buddha, or not according to early Buddhism or Theravada Buddhism. That's not the case, because what they've been telling us for thousands of years, and we ought to listen because they're the experts. If we're going to listen to medical people as experts and psychologists and this and that, we have to also listen to the great spiritual practitioners as experts. Then we have to take it seriously. That transforms the samskaras. And it makes sense, right? Because it is the root level. Like the subconscious is rooted in that sensorium of the body.
Yeah, we call it transforming the psychosomatic organism,
exactly.
Isn't it? How our nervous system is directly connected to our psychological state. And whatever gets triggered mentally goes to nervous system, and we like we shake, or we get really like a heartbeat get faster. All these things are the reaction of the mental stimuli from outside, right? Yes. So that if that becomes constant, then body will act as if that's normal, right? It'll always be that way, unless we attack it, we interfere that movement of the body. So the interference could be for example, meditation or self-inquiry, this kind of practice to attack that reactiveness of nervous system, so that we calm it down and we consciously try to aware of this nervous system, the movement of nervous system, from a very strong mindfulness practice of our senses, how we feel when we breathe, like when we go to first Vipassana meditation, be aware of your breath. How does it start? When you breathe in, how the air goes through your nostrils. It becomes very, very subtle, at a very like a minuscule, the subtle stage, and more you pay attention to it, more you can transform your nervous system. It becomes calm, and you have this technique within yourself how to calm yourself down, right? When you do these practices.
Well, it's interesting because, as you know, like in the past, like certain retreats and lectures and this and that I've had, I would mention to the people when talking about what we're talking about, like, did you guys remember to breathe today? And people would just be like, he's wacko, this guy. But it's an interesting question because did you remember to breathe? It's funny, isn't it? Like, you don't, it's such an unconscious function that we never pay attention to. And what you're doing with what we're talking about is you're bringing that awareness back to something so natural, but it has such a overwhelming effect on stress, anxiety, depression. Isn't it interesting, right? You're paying attention to something so primal that we don't consider. It's like mindfulness practice, right? Like satipatthana. You're being aware of the wandering of your mind. You're trying to bring your awareness back to that constant wandering of your mind, like being aware of the activity. Likewise with vipassana, you're bringing it back to the breath, and it has such a great effect on like what you were talking about, the nervous system. It has and if we look at like the growing rates of suicide, depression, stress, anxiety in the world, it's because people are overwhelmed with life and they're not paying attention to the simple things in life. You know, like I mentioned in the Fasting the Mind book, the KISS method, the keep it simple, stupid method, like keeping your life as simple as possible and falling in love again with simplicity. And that's all it is about, right? It's especially Eastern spirituality is about falling in love with simplicity as opposed to falling in love with being busy, and because all that's going to do is agitate your nervous system, and you're not going to be able to get yourself out of that if you have done that for, I shouldn't say shouldn't be able to get out of it. Let's say that there's a possibility, right? But if you do it for way too long and you're on death's door and you've got 5 minutes to live, it's too late. You know what I mean?
Yes, this busy lifestyle becomes so ingrained in ourselves, all of us. But yeah, so important to remember that how simple things are actually very fundamental to keep our life in order, right?
Yeah.
But because we live in such busy world, so we forget these things. But actually, what keeps our life in order is the simple things, right? Something that ring the bell in my head when I was listening to Sadhguru once. He said, the power of breathing, actually. So he basically said, like, imagine that you take your breath away. Try to stop breathing right now. Very uncomfortable, right? That if someone were to, say, just choke you, you will not be alive anymore.
Yeah, of course.
So how just breathing itself is such important thing, and it has such immense power over our life and our being, human being, right? So use that as a great tool to keep our mind in order as well. It's such, we take it for granted, right? Like you said, but just people scoff. Do you remember you've been breathing today?
Did you remember to breathe?
Yeah, did you remember?
That's what I was saying.
Yeah. Like, you're like, oh, what are you talking about? But that's what actually keeps you alive, really. So bring that awareness to breathing, and that I think it's just it's kind of technology if you are to use it in the right way.
As you know, most people, when I would ask them that, they would say, "Oh, I didn't actually, like, I didn't remember." And it kind of, the why I would ask that, and I've been asked that also before by other teachers, is that it grounds you because you've been kind of up in your head all day until someone just went boing on your head and went, "Oh my God!" Like, I didn't remember to breathe.
It's like that every time, actually, when I hear that. Oh, shit, that's right.
And that's why Vipassana is important in the morning. First thing you do. Well, not first thing you do, brush your teeth, take a poo-poo, and get ready for meditation. But it's within the first half an hour of rising, you know what I mean? So you are paying attention to the breath. You're bringing yourself back to the raw elements of life, back to the simple things in life. And then when the complexity of your daily life emerges, you can deal with it appropriately and immediately. That's the whole point, right? So the anxiety, the stress, the depression, the suicide, they're all a result of a mind that's completely overwhelmed by life. Overwhelmed, right? We see the depression rates all around the world. We see the high suicide rates in Far Eastern Asia and young people jumping out of buildings and stuff that when you and I were young, never heard of, right? I mean, back in the 80s, when I was a little young wee grasshopper, if a teenager had jumped out of a building and killed himself, it would have been the biggest thing in the world. Yeah. But now it's so common because the way the world's structured with its busyness and this and that, people think that this is the stupid thing about the entire world, not just any one particular culture. But to believe that you can develop a harmonious, sane and healthy world by just pushing people to their limits is the height of insanity. You're not going to get it that way because we are not robots, man. Like, this is the thing. We are an organism that's a part of a bigger organism, and we have particular limitations that need to be respected. Psychological limitations, physical limitations. And the height of humility is to appreciate those, to respect those, to honor those, and to live your life in accordance with that. You know what I mean? So to live your life in accordance with a simpler life and not trying to become Superman or Batman or the Incredible Hulk. Living as a human, actually, not living beyond. And there's all these books now, Superhuman and this and that. This is all nonsense. We need a book just called Human, How to Be Human, because we fundamentally actually don't know how to be human. And Eastern spirituality, all of the paths of Eastern spirituality, when people ask me, what's the crux of them, of these paths? The crux of them is not to be at odds with your own humanity. Not to fight your own humanity, not to try and make yourself better, but not being at odds with it. Accepting those things about yourself, accepting the limitations that we have as humans. Go and fight a lion. See, we know who's going to win. You know what I mean? We can get the biggest human in the world. They're never going to win. So, let's say have a gun. But, you know what I mean? So we're developing a culture that are not honoring that limitations that we have. And actually not honoring the simplicity. We're focusing just on the sympathetic nervous system. You got to be a go-getter. You got to get good grades. You got to look a certain way. And this is all nonsense. It's only the older cultures in the world, the cultures that you and I that usually love being around and living in, that they don't even have a concept of that because they live a simple life. Yes. When you and I, we're too busy for them, see? Because they'll say, Guy and Jason, you guys are crazy. Just chill. It's okay. It's okay. You're in rural India now. Just go and, dig plant some rice, and there's nothing else to do. Have a tea after it. And
yeah, it's actually quite interesting when you look at it. Like, for millions of years, a human, sapiens as a species, evolved up to today, right? When you look at the much bigger picture, we are no better than any other species on this planet. No. But because we have such great ability to adapt and work with one another, that the social skills, because of those skills, we are here, really, and we have ability to think rationally, and we have emotion and whatnot, all these things. But it's kind of interesting that our intellectual mind got better of our species in the end. We came this far to think that, like, we are superhuman. Like, I am superhuman. I am I'm the richest person in the world. This type of thinking, you know, like just to being at odds in the world, in humanity, just to be at odds, right? At odds. So it's that's the power of rational thinking in a sense, but does it really is it really benefiting us in the end? Probably not. Not in this way anyway. We have this ability to think, not to become this way, right? Not to have our young generation, young people to kill themselves in a young age. That's such a tragic thing. Yeah, and we came so far away from that way of thinking that we are part of much bigger than ourselves. Way we think became too individualistic, just to become a go-getter and just to please ourselves, and not in an appropriate way. That in the end become very destructive to humanity. In the end.
Well, like what we always mention on this podcast, the individual, especially from the Eastern spiritual perspective, don't really exist. What is the individual? The individual is an accumulation of conditioning, of social conditioning, of family conditioning, of educational conditioning. It's a construct. It's not the reality. You yourself are part of something much greater than yourself. And that's, again, actually, when people understand that, it helps them to alleviate a lot of anxiety. When they understand that they're not an individual at odds against the world and that the world's against them, but rather that they are a part of the world, that's a great relief, actually. And a lot of people are not privy to that sort of knowledge. I wasn't privy to that sort of knowledge when I was growing up. I was never told that you're part of something much greater than yourself. You're taught in school, you ought to get good grades, you ought to, achieve, you need to have goals and so forth and so on. And then Eastern spirituality came along in my life and said, no purpose, no goals, all good. I'm like, damn, all good then, I'm sweet. You know what I mean? Like, fully, yeah. Because the individual is limited, and those limitations hold it back from being part of the entire thing. As Zhuangzi said in the chapter, make oneness your house. So he's saying, you've got to get out of that individualistic thinking. And I like what you mentioned about rationality, because rationality, as you mentioned, kind of, we've over employed rationality in the world. I mean, it's causing a lot of damage in the world. And I mentioned in Fasting the Mind, the book, I mentioned the modern science of mind fasting, where you have the cold cognition, which is the prefrontal cortex, the rational, intellectual, and then the primary part of the mind, which is the hot cognition, which is the automatic, the spontaneous, the effortless part, the part that makes me open and close my hands without thinking about it. It's that thing that allows us to produce great skill and great art and everything like that. They both go together, but you can't have one without the other. But what we are doing is we are just highlighting this part of the mind. And we think that, because when we think of the sense of I, right, when I think of myself as Jason, and anyone listening and yourself, we're thinking here with this thing. We're thinking with that part. We're not thinking, this part here knows that that's a ridiculous assumption, because your experience of life is dependent on so many other things. And you don't have control of your life, really. You think you have control. We can have this podcast and this and that. This is minimal. You know what I mean? This is nothing. Your whole experience of life is dependent upon a whole lot of things. Like, that's what this pandemic has taught a lot of people, right? Life itself is dependent upon so many other things: economical, social, cultural. There's so many things, so many factors that go into that. And so, when you're constructing a world based just on here, there can only be destruction. There can only be psychological destruction, because you're separating yourself from the world, and you're only employing one part of the mind, which causes an imbalance within your mind, and doesn't allow you to act spontaneously and effortlessly and appropriately to each and every situation, because you're overthinking everything. Someone gives you a thing, and then you start to get it, and you're like, you're just using this. You're not intuitively responding to whatever the situation is. And that's how our education constructed. That's how our social dynamics are constructed. Not just in the West, but it's becoming part and parcel in East Asia, where you're from, as you know. And in the Zhuangzi, when Confucius as Zhuangzi, when he says you need to fast the mind, that's what he's actually talking about. He's talking about, he didn't have the cognitive science terminology in the science, but he's talking about fasting the I in yourself, right? So that rational aspect of I, that's right and wrong, this and that, that's what keeps you in the way of, or keeps you from experiencing life as it truly is. And so, as I've mentioned many times on this podcast, there's a thing in the Zhuangzi, a phrase in the Zhuangzi chapter called Qing. And Qing is not Jing, don't get it confused with Jing, the three treasures. This is Qing. Qing means species-specific essence. It's a difficult word to translate. You can translate it as factors or psychological or emotional factors, but species-specific essence. So each species or animal has a particular trait, whether it's good or bad, right? And so what Zhuangzi explains is our species-specific essence is to discern, is Qing. Now Qing is, for us, is the discernment between this and that. We have this ability to say that's right, that's wrong, good, bad, this and that. In the West, they would say that's a great thing. But he's saying it's a flaw. Because that creates a partial reality. And reality itself is impartial. See, making oneness your house, as Zhuangzi would say, is to fast that Qing. So what he's saying to Yan Wei is you've got to fast that. That's got to go. This habit of this and that keeps you away from the experience of the Tao. It eclipses the Tao in your life. The Tao cannot flow through you when you are operating from this and that. And this is another reason why depression, anxiety, and so forth and so on are happening, because in education, the way that we're raising our children and so forth and so on, is we're telling them to discern between this and that all the time, to be analytical, which is the highlight of the prefrontal cortex. But it's keeping them away from the holistic reality, which is the hot cognition. Because the reality is essentially holistic.
Yep.
And our experience of life is holistic. That's why sometimes the most beautiful and wonderful things we experience in life are things that we experience together, are things that we experience as almost not part of our sense of person, as something more collective.
It's because our society and an education system only activate and support the cold cognitive aspect of our brain. So alongside with the Qing idea that the species-specific essence, we only support that side of our mind, right? For quite some time too, actually. So I also see what's happening right now, and as it's been happening for a long time, is that we start losing our innocence, right? We have the Qing ability has been way too activated for a long time, so that we lose our humility, so that we stop being innocent. And now we see that's happening at a young age too, right? And they already know a lot of things, which is mostly intellectual things, so that they already know so many things, such as science and math and this kind of categorical study. So that they already developed this competitiveness, the idea of how their life should be and what kind of job they're gonna have, and they already have these ideas at age 10 or below that. So they lose this childlike innocence at a very young age, and that's another big problem, because those young children will grow up eventually and will lead the society and whatnot, and how will the world look like. And that's something I a bit worry about, really, because that innocence is it's a pure emotion that the human can have, and we can share among each other, and that binds humanity together. But we are losing it, right? And we don't have the compassion to others, and we only want to compete and be better than other people. And this is all just come from that core cognitive thinking.
Exactly. Well, you and I, we always talk about this, but isn't it interesting that when you know more, you lose your innocence? It's interesting, right? Like this has been a topic in psychology and that for a long time, and also in Eastern thought for a long time, and understanding of that, right? So when you become a know-it-all, you lose your innocence, and that's what we are seeing around the world, where we're still seeing cultures like more rural and earthly cultures still have that innocence. They still have that. And when we talk about innocence, you have to talk about like a wonder of the world too. Like there's still a curiosity about things, you know what I mean? There's still, and well, you and I, we still have that about ourselves, we have an innocent curiosity about things, about other places and cultures and so forth and so on. But it's like that. There was a satsang with Sadhguru once before, and he said, don't ask a 15-year-old anything these days. They know everything. So, and he's not saying that in the sense that, when we were younger, like people would say, kids, they think they know everything. It's not in that sense. He's saying it in the sense from the modern perspective, where a lot of young people have access to the internet and they think that they can just look up something and know it from just reading something on Wikipedia or something like this. And we know that's all nonsense. Like, for example, if you were to look up Zen Buddhism, for example, and you read the Wikipedia page and you think that you know Zen Buddhism, you got a lot of hard truths coming, because that's not what it is.
Such excess of this information actually handicapped us from a young age to have a perspective.
Yeah.
Like you said, you read a few paragraphs about Zen Buddhism in the Wikipedia, and then you think that you know. Like, I don't know if I thought that way when I was 15, actually.
But that's how they're operating.
Yeah, that's
now.
what I'm saying. That's how quickly this information age changes people. We lose perspective, so that we just see the little hole. We see the world through the little hole, and we think that's the world, right? It's the same thing. Whereas outside of that hole, the world is so vast, and there's so many things that you need to explore to have a large perspective, right?
Yeah. Well, information doesn't imply knowledge or wisdom or understanding. Doesn't imply that. When you talk about intelligence, you have to include innocence, humility, compassion, forgiveness. These things are a deeper intelligence, a deeper understanding of reality. Information, anyone can accumulate information. And if you've got a good memory, you can recite it and you can regurgitate it. It doesn't mean you are wise. And that's the difference, and that's the problem with focusing on rationality, because we design educational structures and we're producing children who think that if they just have accumulated all this knowledge, well, actually, the way it's designed is if they do accumulate all this knowledge, they will get the job, they will get this and that. That's the stupid way our world is designed. But are those people wise? Likely not, because they're not innocent, they're not humble, they're not compassionate. They are just in the business of accumulating memories and regurgitating them, because that is what ensures their existence in whatever path they are following in the working field or whatever they choose to follow. And so what we're talking about is the complete counter opposite. It's, when people, like I said, when people talk intelligence, they're talking just about cognitive intelligence, but they're not talking about the emotional sphere. They're not talking about all of this. You can have someone with the highest IQ in the world, But they will be nothing against someone like Ramana Maharshi, who I don't know what his IQ would have been, but he never went to school and so forth and so on. I didn't know him personally, but I'm pretty sure he's at a higher level of wisdom than someone with a high level of IQ,
And I think what's happening with within our society with the supporting too much of a cognitive side of our brain is that complete imbalance between two cognitions. We don't activate hot cognition consciously anymore. No. It's always activating, but in a very dormant way, right?
Or we suppress it.
Yeah, or we suppress it.
We suppress it with this.
Oh, yes. So that cold cognition always active and always awake, while hot cognition is in dormant state or suppress it.
Yeah.
So what's happening is that I think psychologically, this wheel of samsara framework, the samskara, vasanas, and karma, stays there, getting rotten. Yeah. Never get revealed, so that we won't understand why we act certain way, why we have suppression, why we suffer from anxiety. It's there, but never get activated and get access to it because we just focus on cold cognition. It's there, but it's getting accumulated and more accumulated, and in the end, it'll come out results of some heavy depression problem or even schizophrenic, that sort of problem. Yeah. It just stays there and getting rotten.
Yeah.
That's what's happening. Yeah. That's why I think we have this serious problem, a young suicide and whatnot. And even funny thing is that our psychological study, so like a psychologist who want to heal people and this and that, are functioning from cold cognition way. They are trying to find a solution from cold cognitive way of thinking. How is it possible?
It's not possible.
They do know we have subconscious and unconscious, of course conscious, but everything they study about these things come from purely cold cognitive aspect. Yep. So I don't know how they can really fix problem at a very bottom level, fundamentally.
No, we can't. And that's the thing is, so we have made the rationality, right, the pinnacle of life, since the Enlightenment in Europe during the Enlightenment in Europe during the Enlightenment period. Not the Eastern Enlightenment, obviously this is two different things, but the birth of rationality, so to speak, like in the highlight of rationality. And so we've made that the pinnacle of life in the world. And like what you are saying, you are ignoring almost the totality of your mind because you're highlighting on this. And it's interesting because like Zhuangzi, Lao Tzu, Gautama, these great beings would say, there's wisdom in the irrational, and the irrational sphere contains the wisdom of life. Your body, the way it moves and everything, just the processes of even thinking is all irrational. It's spontaneous. It's not something that you can think about and calculate and measure, so to speak. It just happens like a flower blooms. And so even like someone like Daniel Kahneman, who's a great psychologist, he actually, believes in that too. Like, because he studies cognitive science, he understands that you can't just have a world based on one part of the function of the mind. You are basing all of your reasoning and logic and so forth and so on about how things are based on one particular function of the mind. You're not basing it on the holistic mind, the whole totality of the mind. And so you're judging your whole experience of life, and you're judging the way life is based on that. So education is designed on that. And this is why you're getting there's new formulas or new structures of school are being born, right? So you've got Steiner schools and Montessori and all of these other styles, the Krishna schools and these other schools that are developing, that are trying to at least appreciate that there's another part of the mind that needs to be activated. Because it's actually, whether you want to agree, whether you want to argue with this or not, it doesn't matter, but this is the truth. The hot cognition is what mainly functions. Though we think we are these paragons of reason and rationality, we're not. That's employed only in a very small percentage of the day. Even though we think we are rational all the time, we are not. The way you are listening now, the way we are reacting towards each other, our facial, our social cues, all of this is all hot cognition. This is all intuitive. So the focus on the irrational has to come to the forefront. This is why in Zen Buddhism, when they use Zen koans as a practice to get you out of rationality and to get you, again, thinking from the cold cognition. And thinking is actually the wrong word here. Reacting from cold cognition. Intuitively reacting, right? So like a koan in Zen would be like this, people probably can see this cup here. And the master would say, see that cup there? Don't call it a cow. Instantly, like when you hear that, you're like,
oh, what?
But do you see what's happening? Because of what he said is so irrational, it puts you in your mind and you think. And see, this is what the master's trying to highlight. You see? Your reaction instantly should be monkey. It should just come monkey. There shouldn't be any thought. Don't call it a cow. But instantly, the initial, like, irrational, like, statement, you're like, what the hell is he talking about?
Because you still think this is a cup.
Yeah, he's still a cup, and and even what he said is so stupid.
Yeah.
Don't call it a cow. What do you mean? Don't call it a cow?
Completely like nonsensical.
Nonsensical. He threw you off. He threw you a curveball.
Yes,
see.
Yes.
But what the master wants you to say is monkey, or or giraffe, or the universe. Stars. It doesn't matter. The more irrational, the better for him. What is it? He'd be like, oh yeah, A+. It doesn't get any better than this kid. But so they're trying to highlight that you are constantly thinking, analytically thinking, and analytical thought gets in the way of the experience of life. Like that Lateralis, a Tool song, right? Overthinking, overanalyzing separates the body from the mind. You're making a separation between something which is a holistic thing. And so the analytical mind is constantly dividing the world up, measuring the world, and this is what Maya is. Maya, the root of Maya in Sanskrit, marta, meaning measurement. And so you are constantly measuring reality, which creates an illusion. Not that the physical reality is an illusion. Your perception of reality is illusory because you're constantly measuring it and separating it. And in a sense, it's one. Not in a sense, it is one. Let's make that statement right now.
It's always been one.
It has always been one. And one is even a bad word because one implies two. It's whole. It's a unified reality, and we think that it's separate because we can see differing objects and we resonate according to our conditional likes and dislikes. And this is why we need to fast the mind.
I mean, as you know, I was born and raised in Korea in such super analytical society, and I got that education and all that, and it's such stressful life, actually, to live from that place. You analyze everything, like just the smallest thing, like just has cup in this way or that way. Just everything, about everything, you're so analytical. And that's the only way that you've learned how to think and operate, actually. But such stressful state of mind. But again, since I left Korea and seen the different countries and different culture and meeting a lot of different people and local people, and like such at ease attitude and state of mind is kind of been a biggest therapeutic experiences.
Yeah.
Yeah, because like again, those people, especially places like India, Nepal, or Thailand, people on the street who sell just simple things, tea or just snacks or something like that, they don't have much, but they are in such blissful state of mind. They're very happy, and I that was actually for me quite interesting. What made them so happy, you know? Because I learned to be certain way, act certain way, to be happy, right? That you need like a certain bullet point conditions to be happy almost. But those people seem just purely happy without doing much and having anything really, you know. But that is because they don't have that strong faculty of cold cognitive thinking. Yeah, that was the key. And their pure state of mind is already fasted the mind, really. They live from that hot region of the brain, so that they were so in sync with their reality and environment that they're in, and they know how to live with one another, living in harmony in a community, and that itself was just such immense life lesson. You know.
Also, one of our good friends in Tiruvannamalai, Gopi. You know, so like for those obviously people listening and watching don't know Gopi, but the place we were staying, the place we were living, the owners had just a guy to watch the place, and I don't even really know his real name. He just calls himself Gopi, but because Gopi's a cow herder and he herds cows like during the day and slept at our house, well, out, you know, building at night. So, and his experience, and he's just like, he doesn't make much money, but just the joy and the bliss in his eyes is something someone can't buy with money. It can't be achieved. It can't be done with analytical thinking. And just the way you know, I always think of Gopi when we think about this, but the way he lives from the heart, you know what I mean? Like he's just so warm to everyone he encounters, right? And that warmth is missing in the world because we are operating from the measuring mind, the analytical mind. And when you're operating from a measuring mind, you're always looking at reality in a self-interested way.
Yes. What am I going to get from that?
Exactly. Where Gopi has nothing to get from reality. He's one with it. He doesn't need to acquire anything from this reality. He doesn't need to gain anything because he's part of it. He's living on the same planet that Jeff Bezos is living. But I bet you his experience of life is way better than Jeff Bezos' experience. Because Jeff Bezos' experience is stressful, anxious, and everyone goes, oh, yeah, but he's got all the money in the world and whatever. But he doesn't have, look at Gopi's eyes. He doesn't have that look, that innocence, that humility, that compassion. You can't buy it. You can never get it.
Someone like Gopi, I think, if you were to give some tips, for example, right? He wouldn't change his the impression, appearance when he gets 10 rupees to 1,000 rupees, for example. Like, he wouldn't have any difference.
Well, we saw it.
Yeah.
We gave him a tip once, a big tip, and his but the warmth was always there.
Yeah, always there, yeah.
So like you said, 1 rupee to 1,000 rupees, for him, it doesn't matter because his experience of life is shanti.
Yes.
You know what I mean? It's the same across the board.
Yeah.
You could give him $1 million. Shanti, same. Because what he needs from life, see, the thing is that he doesn't live from greed, right? So he doesn't need anything from life. Sure, he needs a chapati, he needs some dal, just to, you know, the basics of life. But he doesn't need to conquer the world. And so because we're operating constantly from this cold cognition, we're constantly in this habit of self-interest and trying to conquer the world. It's a survival instinct.
My benefit.
Yeah, it ensures my security in the world. Do you see my value in the world? Do you see my status? I'm safe. I'm safe. And it's like, no, you're not. And as Zhuangzi and Lao Tzu would say, you've put a target on yourself. In seeking that security and that fame and that fortune, you got now a target on your back, son. You're in big trouble. Because people are going to come down and knock you down. But when you're like Gopi and you're just living and in harmony with the world, Shanti, everything's good. You have nothing to achieve, you have no goals, you have no purpose. You're living as one with the world.
Yeah.
And this is a diametrically opposed mentality to the modern perspective, which is, primarily the Western individualistic perspective, which is based on self-interest. And so from Zhuangzi's perspective, we need to fast that individual to experience the world as Gopi experiences. And from that state, you're always happy. Everything's good. Like you said, your experience of life is not determined by the money that you receive. It's a quality. Your life is, it's about the quality of life. It's not about what you receive. How is this going to benefit me? That's the wrong question, instantly.
We should say, how is it gonna make me more suffer?
Yeah.
Instead.
Actually,
right?
That's right. Yeah.
How much pain is this gonna give me?
Yeah, 100%, 100%. And that's why actually when you ask if you ask someone like Gopi to do something for you like that, that's probably the question that he poses to himself. I don't need that.
Yeah, I don't need that much of burden and stress.
That's that phrase, right? More money, more problems. As they always say, more money, more problems. And gives you more headaches, gives you more suffering, gives you more burden. To a certain degree, obviously, you know what I mean? But like you said beautifully, is that how much will this make me suffer? Okay, I can take on this project, but how much suffering am I going to accumulate? And then, but this is how entrepreneurs and that rationalize that. Oh, yeah, but all great things come through suffering. Isn't that? Do you see the different mentality? So the Western mentality is, oh yeah, you need to suffer a bit to gain something. And the East is like saying, no, you actually gain what you really want in the dissolution of suffering. And the identification that you do suffer, but there's a path out of suffering. And the path out of suffering is to stop doing, to stop your volition, your action to anything, like the end of will.
Yeah.
The actual end of will, which is very confronting for a lot of people, because when they come across, I remember people listening to a talk with Ajahn Chah, and he was talking about the end of will, and like everyone in the crowd is just like, what the hell? Like, I thought we were coming here to get motivated, and it's like, man, you're in the wrong place. He comes from the Theravada forest Buddhist tradition. You're in the
motivation and drive.
and inspiration. You ain't going to get here. You may find happiness and contentment, but you are not going to get self-motivated. And this is not about self-improvement or self-development. This is about the dissolution of will. And as Buddha, Lao Tzu, Zhuangzi, Gaudapada, Shankara, all of these great sages would say that the suffering ends when the will diminishes. The will to succeed, the will to all of these desires you have, your willful purpose.
Yeah, all these things like my purpose, my existence,
yeah, exactly,
and what meaning of life, reason to live, and success, achievement, goals, all these things that which society and the schools promote. That's purely based on insecurity and separation.
Yeah. And
stronger that is, more we suffer psychologically. And we need to be really honest and see things clearly. Is that really benefiting us or not?
As soon as you hear someone say my legacy, that's a red flag on the play. I'm worried about my legacy. First of all, you're overestimating yourself. Like, you are overestimating yourself, son. Like, no. Don't, if instantly, like, it's the most egotistical thing you could ever say, right?
That's so funny.
Because first of all, think about it, right? 200 years time from now, no one's going to remember any of us. And that's a humbling thing. That's a humbling thing. No one will remember. Think of the most famous person you can think of in the world. They will not be remembered 200 years time from now. Because there will be new people 200 years time from now who will be famous and so forth and so on. No one's going to know that person. But the irony is the great individuals who dissolved suffering and went the other way, they are the ones who are remembered thousands of years' time.
Yeah, well, Gautama, the Buddha, Shankara, Gaudapada.
Firmly in our minds. They're a great reminder. They existed. And they went the other way. But we don't remember the billions and billions who went the other way. They're a distant memory. Yeah. I can't tell you my great-grandparents' name. I have no recollection of them. You know what I mean? Their kids and... I mean, nothing. Do you know what I mean? So we can't overestimate ourselves. See, that's the problem with self-interest. See, we're constantly overestimating ourselves. We think more of ourselves than what we actually are. And what someone like Gopi, he doesn't even use his real name. He uses just a name from the Bhagavad Gita. So you're one with the world. You don't have to achieve. There doesn't have to be a goal. This is all BS that we've learned from socialization.
I think that a lot of insecurity it comes from that, like, you want to have your name or existence known by people around you, right? When your existence gets recognized by other people, that you feel some sort of comforting feeling and like somewhat psychologically, like a little bit, oh, I did something good and this and that. But that sort of feeling is very momentary, and it's not something genuine and authentic, I don't think. No. But once we realize that, like you said, we are part of something greater than ourselves, and we were born so that we will die one day. Once we can be free from the fear of death and realize we are part of the universe, then my existence kind of term is meaningless. And you kind of come to a realization that how silly I was, or how childish you were thinking, really, that your existence to be known by other people. It's such like a childlike way of thinking when you think about it.
Well, when you look at it, me, my, I don't exist. Yeah. Doesn't exist. It exists from your own perspective and the perception of others. But according to the East, it's just an accumulation of experience that you've solidified as a sense of person. Yeah.
So, to go the other way, like when your existence doesn't get recognized other people, what happens then? You psychologically super insecure, right? You're having some psychological crash, and you feel such insecurity within yourself, and you feel that you need to do something about it to get yourself known by other people. That's not natural. That's not how human life is really at all.
Yeah, you become a hostage to other people's projections of who you think, of who you are. And also you become a hostage of your own projection of who you are. If you understood what we understand, or what we're speaking about in this thing, you don't never have to be a hostage to those thoughts like, my life doesn't have value, or, my existence is meaningless, no one cares about me. This is all BS. This is just the I, the ego, talking to itself, ruminating on its own thoughts. And it's all BS. It's not true. You've been trained to think that you should have purpose, that you should have a goal. Who's to say? Why? Because someone on a podcast said you should have? Or some inspirational talk speaker said that you should have a purpose? It gives your life value? That's all nonsense. Your life has value already. You don't need to give it value.
Yeah.
You exist. You are alive.
Yes. You need to recognize what's already there.
Yeah. Well, it's like recognizing the breath, right? It's that simple. Your existence and your aliveness is it. That's the great boon. There's nothing more than that. I became a great basketballer. Doesn't mean crap. There's been other good basketballers before too. But have you worked this out? No, sounds too difficult. Well, that's where happiness and contentment and everything arise. As Lao Tzu said, do you know the contentment of contentment? If you walk around asking people that, they have no idea what you're talking about, see? Do you know the contentment of contentment? What do you mean? Will I get that when I get $1 billion or something like that? No. Because if you're the type of person who wants $1 billion, then $1 billion will never satisfy you. You'll get to $1 billion, and what's the next benchmark? Well, 2 billion, 1 trillion, 1 quadrillion. Go down the line. So you'll never be satisfied. You're that type of person. But if you get what we're talking about here today, then know the contentment of contentment, then that can only come about through fasting the mind, through getting rid of that habitual tendency of trying to achieve something in life, this constant doing to get something back in return, this constant reward and punishment mentality.
There's no end to it.
There's no end to it. No end to it. And we go crazy playing the game. Because you can only go crazy. There's no other end result. Because like I said, if you've got that mentality to get $1 billion, when you get to that $1 billion, you still won't be satisfied because your nature is not satisfied. It doesn't matter what I can give you, you won't be satisfied. You'll constantly want more. But you need to resonate with the Eastern mentality of less is more. Having less is more. Less information is more valuable. And you understand this when you do follow that path.
Yeah, when we get to practice like Hatha Yoga or Qigong, Tai Chi, all these things, they keep saying let go of the, like a certain tense muscle. Tension. Let go of that tension and just flex the muscles or let it go. Mind is the same. You just need to let that tension go and then let that space come into your heart and see what happens from there, right?
Yep.
Mind works just exactly the same.
Well, that's why I mentioned in Fasting the Mind, I mentioned the old Lao Tzuian analogy of the mind cup. So what's, it's a different way of thinking. What's valuable? The cup or the space within the cup? And, it's ironic because Westerners often, and a lot of people in general, will say the cup. But it's a space within the cup that's valuable. Because that's what actually you can put, it gives it the ability to put liquid in and so forth and so on. And so we need to cultivate space in the mind. And there's another way to look at that too, is that our mind cup is full. So what happens when you continually fill the cup, fill the space? Well, it overflows. And it leads to all sorts of problems.
Well, to be honest, the minute that you wake up, you start filling that cup up, right? Until you go to sleep.
Yeah.
Constantly, you just filling it,
cup,
and sometimes overflowing.
Yeah. Before midday.
Yes. So we need to cultivate that space. You gotta let the tension go. Let the grip be loose.
Yeah. You gotta let go of yourself. Let go of this rationality, this person that you believe you are. Once you begin to let go of that, depression, stress, anxiety, all sorts of insane thoughts begin to subside, because they all arise from you believing you're this person that's in opposition to everything and everyone else. When you understand, well, you come to when you empty your mind cup and you understand that space is what's valuable, then you can merge with reality. You can feel a sense of unity with life. And that's where the actual security is, the real security. It's ironic because insecurity is cultivated when you are looking for security as a person, but it actually cultivates insecurity because you are measuring yourself against the world. And so this causes tons of problems.
Yeah, we already built that separation, that boundary.
The boundary, yeah.
Between what's secure and what's not secure, right?
Yeah.
And we seek one over the other. You're already creating that opposition, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And what we've been speaking about today is about emptying the mind cup, coming back, well, practicing the fasting the mind lifestyle. And there's so much to talk about when we talk about that, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, in your book, definitely go through like historical background and again, like a modern science of mind fasting and practical side of it and all that is we can take on board as a complete lifestyle, I think, and that'll eventually transform our life in the end.
And that's what we really need. We need to put the brakes on, and we need to fast the mind. We need to stop being busy, because busyness is leading to all sorts of insanity and unhealth in the world, actually. Yeah. Illness, we should say, is leading to sickness in the world. And so this lifestyle and practice, which is as one of the core practices in the East, is what will reorient our focus to what's natural, what's simple, and that simplicity will transform the world into having, the world that we all deserve.
Absolutely. That's guaranteed.
Guaranteed,
100%.
Yeah, because you can see it on an individual level. So if you see it on your own individual level, and there has been no deviation from that for thousands of years. Everyone who applies this lifestyle and philosophy to their life are transformed. And it doesn't matter what psychology in that say. It doesn't matter if psychology say that you're bound to your genetics or you're bound to your conditioning, this and that. Eastern spirituality has always said, no, everything is change and will change. But you need to apply a certain method to your life to transform it. And fasting the mind is one particular method that the results are guaranteed. So that's about it, isn't it?
Yeah.
Spoke about everything you want to speak about?
Yeah, definitely. It's all traditional wisdom traditions leads into that mind fasting philosophy. So all the path that we choose to follow will benefit us, our spiritual growth, 100%.
Guaranteed.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you guys next week.